Here's what nobody tells you about being disrespected. The person who wins that moment almost never says a word, and the person who loses it almost always does. What you're about to hear isn't advice. It's a pattern, one that he's been hiding in plain sight every time you walked away from a situation feeling like you gave something away that you didn't have to. Why your instinct in high-stakes moments is almost always working against you. There's a mechanism inside you that was built for a world you no longer live in. It's fast, it's automatic, and in the context of modern social conflict, it almost always costs you more than it protects you. The moment someone crosses a line, that mechanism fires before your conscious mind has processed a single word. And by the time you realize what happened, the response is already out. Most people believe their instinctive reaction is authentic, that it represents them. The reality is harder to sit with. That reaction belongs to your nervous system's threat detection programming, not to your judgment. And your nervous system cannot distinguish between a physical threat and a social one. The cortisol spike is the same. The cognitive narrowing is the same. The drop in available vocabulary is the same. You are making decisions with the fraction of your normal capacity, and you are making them fast, in front of an audience. That is not a position of power. That is a position of exposure. Here is what changes everything. The instinct is not the problem. The instinct is information. The problem is acting on it before you understand what it is telling you. Anger, when examined rather than expressed immediately, tells you exactly where your boundary is. It tells you what matters. It tells you what the situation actually is versus what it appears to be on the surface. None of that information is available when you react before thinking. There is a reason the most effective people in high-pressure situations, leaders who face opposition daily, negotiators who operate in hostile environments, appear almost unnervingly calm when challenged. It is not that they feel less. It is that they have trained a specific capacity that most people never develop deliberately, the space between stimulus and response. That space is not a pause. It is not hesitation. It is where every real decision gets made. And the person who controls that space controls the outcome of the interaction, almost regardless of what the other person does. Think about the last time you said something you regretted in a conflict. Not because you were wrong, because you moved too fast. The words came out before you chose them, and you felt it the moment they left. That feeling is the recognition of a skill that exists, one that can be built. The space between stimulus and response is where power lives. What silence actually communicates when you use it with intention. Most people think silence in a confrontation means you have nothing to say, or that you're backing down, or that the other person won. That is only true if the silence is accidental. Deliberate silence operates on an entirely different frequency. When someone disrespects you and you don't react the way they expected, something specific happens in their internal processing. The script they were running, the one that anticipated defensiveness, justification, or visible anger, hits a wall. And when a script fails, the person running it has to recalibrate. That recalibration takes their attention away from the offense and redirects it toward trying to understand what just happened. You didn't say a word, and you just moved the psychological center of the room. This is not a tactic to memorize. It is a natural consequence of a shift in understanding. Once you recognize that a provocative comment or a disrespectful gesture is, at its core, an attempt to pull you out of your center, the entire dynamic changes. You stop seeing the offense as something that requires immediate resolution. You start seeing it as information about the person who made it. The Stoics built an entire philosophy around this distinction. The core insight was simple and almost ruthless in its precision. Other people's behavior reveals their internal state, not your value. An insult is a projection. A power play is a display of insecurity dressed as confidence. When you internalize that, you stop taking the bait, not because you're suppressing something, but because the bait no longer looks like bait. It looks like what it is. Marcus Aurelius wrote about beginning each day by expecting to encounter difficult, ungrateful, and unpredictable people, not as a pessimistic exercise, as preparation. And preparation in social dynamics is one of the most underrated forms of power available. You cannot be caught off guard by something you already anticipated. And someone who cannot be caught off guard cannot be destabilized. Has this ever clicked for you in real time? A moment where you stayed quiet and felt the room shift? Drop it in the comments. Specific moments, not general agreement. Because what you'll see in those comments is a pattern that connects directly to what comes next. The difference between real emotional control and the version that blows up later. There is a version of composure that looks like strength and is actually a pressure cooker. It absorbs everything, shows nothing, and runs perfectly until it doesn't. And when it fails loudly, a wrong context, in front of the wrong people. Most individuals who describe themselves as calm under pressure are running this version. They are not managing their emotional state. They are deferring it. Real emotional control starts with the distinction that most people skip entirely. The difference between suppression and regulation. Suppression is forcing the response underground. Regulation is processing the response while it is happening. The first one stores energy. The second one converts it. When you suppress, you are betting that the situation will not have another trigger before you get the chance to decompress. That bet loses more often than most people admit. When you regulate, you are doing something harder in the short term and dramatically more effective over time. You are staying present with the discomfort long enough to understand it, which means it stops operating as an unknown variable in your behavior. The mechanism is not complicated. It requires exactly one thing that feels counterintuitive in a high-tension moment: naming what you are feeling internally before deciding how to respond externally. Not performing calm. Choosing it, because you have already processed enough of the experience to make a real choice. This is where assertive communication becomes a precision tool rather than a conflict strategy. The goal is not to win the exchange. The goal is to reposition. To name what occurred, set a clear boundary around it, and do it with the kind of quiet certainty that signals you did not need the confrontation to confirm your standing. That signal, delivered without aggression or apology, carries more weight than almost anything you could say in anger. Here is what makes this real. The cost of reacting badly is never limited to the immediate moment. Every unnecessary escalation drains resources you need for decisions that actually matter. Every time someone's behavior pulled you into a state you did not choose, you paid a price you did not have to pay. If what you are hearing is worth something, the like button is the fastest way to say so. What follows is the part of this framework that almost no one sees until after the situation is already over. Why the people who seem coldest in conflict are actually operating at the highest level. There is a label that gets applied to people who hold their ground in high-pressure social situations without visible emotion. Cold, distant, disconnected. The label says more about the person applying it than the person it describes. What reads as coldness from the outside is, from the inside, a specific kind of clarity that most people never develop because it requires sustained exposure to discomfort over time. It cannot be acquired through information. It is built through repetition, through staying present in situations where the natural impulse is to either collapse or explode, and practicing neither. People with real mental strength feel the same range of emotion as everyone else. The difference is structural. They have developed the capacity to observe their own emotional state without becoming it. And that distinction between experiencing an emotion and being consumed by it changes what options are available to you in any given moment. Here is the frame that makes this practical rather than abstract. There are two categories in every high-stakes interaction: what you control and what you do not. Your response, your posture, your word choice, where you direct your attention. Those belong to you. The other person's behavior, their interpretation of events, their emotional state, what they choose to do next, those do not. When you treat the second category as your responsibility, you spend energy on variables that were never yours to manage. When you hold the line at the first category, something changes. You stop reacting to the other person's moves and start making your own. The most precise way to understand disrespect in a social context is this: it is almost always a test. Not a conscious, deliberate test in every case, but functionally, a test of whether you can be moved, of whether your position is real or performed, of whether the boundary you project is one you actually hold. People who pass that test don't pass it by arguing. They pass it by remaining exactly where they were before the test began. The disrespect arrives. The posture doesn't change. The tone doesn't shift. And the message, delivered without a single word, is more precise than any verbal response could be. This did not move me because it was never going to. That is not performance. That is the result of knowing exactly where you stand. What separates the people who actually change from the people who just watch videos about changing? Getting to this point in the video is not neutral. It means something specific, registered. Not as interesting content, but as recognition. The recognition of a gap between how you responded to a situation and how you understand now that you could have. That gap is the only thing worth paying attention to in this entire conversation. Recognition without application is just more information. And most people are not suffering from a shortage of information. They are suffering from a gap between what they know and what they actually do when the pressure arrives. The reason that gap exists is not motivation. It is not willpower. It is the absence of a practiced response. Because in the moment of actual disrespect, you do not have time to remember a principle. You need a physical habit, something trained enough to activate before the old pattern does. The single most effective way to start building that habit is not complex. It is almost insultingly simple, which is exactly why most people dismiss it before giving it real time. In the next confrontation that matters, do not speak for 3 full seconds after the offense lands. Not as performance, as practice. Those 3 seconds exist for one purpose: to give the regulatory part of your brain enough time to come online before the reactive part has already finished the sentence. 3 seconds sounds trivial. It is not. It is the difference between a response you chose and a reaction that chose you. And every time you execute it, even imperfectly, the space gets slightly easier to hold. Here is what does not get said often enough. The world does not actually respect loudness. It responds to it, because loudness triggers automatic reactions in others, the same way threat responses work. But respect, real and durable respect, the kind that compounds over years of interactions, flows toward the person in the room who needed to do the least to hold the most ground. That person does not announce themselves. They do not need to. They are simply already there when the pressure comes. Exactly where they were before it arrived. If this framework shifted something for you, subscribe and turn on notifications. What gets covered next in this channel follows the same thread, just further down. And before you go, what is the one situation in your life right now where you already know you need to respond instead of react? Leave that in the comments. Not for engagement, because writing it out is the first step of taking it seriously. In the next high-stakes interaction where someone says something that triggers your automatic response, apply one physical rule before you speak. Drop your shoulders, take one slow breath, and hold eye contact for 3 full seconds in complete silence. No expression of agreement, no defensive micro-expression, just steady presence. Those 3 seconds will feel long to you and infinite to the other person. In that window, you will recover access to the part of your mind that the automatic reaction would have locked out. 3 seconds. Every situation that matters. The consistency is the practice.